Hello, my name is Miriam Kalman, business analyst at GFI Israel. I'm going to give you an overview of the alternative protein ecosystem in Israel over the past 6 months. Today, we'll discuss investments over the last 6 months, new startups that were founded, and significant developments with other companies in the field, Israeli government support for the sector, and developments in academia. In terms of investments. Investments in alternative proteins in the first half of 2022 grew 160% as compared to investments in the first half of 2021, despite the market-wide slowdown. Plant-based startups raised $152 million, while companies producing fermentation-derived proteins raised $161 million. After a big year for cultivated meat in 2021, with big raises particularly in the second half, we see a significant reduction in the field. This is due to the ecosystem being small. So the companies that raise money for scale-up don't need to raise more yet, leaving only smaller seed or pre-seed deals for the first half of this year. Israel continues the trend of being second only to the US in total investments in alternative proteins. For the first time, Israel is #1 in investments in plant-based startups, ahead even of the US. This shows the great confidence investors have in the Israeli ecosystem. This is true also in fermentation-derived proteins, where 38% of investments were in Israeli companies, second only to the US. Comparing investments in alternative proteins in Israel to investments in food tech as a whole, we see that since 2021, alternative proteins make up 70% of investments in the field. This shows the continued confidence, as I said, that investors have in alternative proteins specifically as part of food tech. Deals in the first half of 2021 range from the large investments in companies such as Redefine and Remilk to seed and pre-seed investments in companies such as Yoav. Let's take a look at the leading deals that happened this year. Redefine Meat launched in several markets, including the UK, Netherlands, and Germany last year. Following this, they raised $135 million in a round led by Synthesis Capital and Hanaco Ventures. Remilk, a fermentation-derived company, raised $130 million Series B, led by Hanaco Ventures. Imagine Dairy, also a fermentation-derived dairy company, extended their seed round with an additional $13 million, led by Target Global. Plantish, who created a plant-based whole-cut salmon, raised $12.5 million in seed funding, led by State of Mind Ventures. We will now move on to an overview of the industry landscape. As we can see, 10 new startups were either founded or newly entered the alternative protein space in the last 6 months, bringing the total to 55, and there are at least 10 other startups in the pipeline. Many new startups in the cultivated and fermentation-derived space have sprung up at the seed stage, with existing plant-based companies moving into scale-up and commercialization. 10 new startups were either founded or newly entered the alternative protein space, 4 fermentation-derived, 3 cultivated, and 3 plant-based. In the cultivated field, we have Optium, a SaaS company that uses AI to optimize the production process for cultivated and fermentation-derived proteins. Mermaid, a cultivated fish company with a recyclable algae-based process. Plurinuva, a joint venture between Pluristem, a biotech company with years of experience in stem cells, and Tnuva, Israel's largest food company. In the plant-based field, we have Govan, a biotech company developing technology to extract proteins from plant-based sources. Genesee, a biotech company have developed technology for extracting protein from macroalgae. And Zemufit, a company developing enzymes as additives to plant-based protein to boost functionality. Fermentation-derived protein companies include Polypo and Pigmentum, 2 molecular farming companies who use plants as a platform to produce proteins. Polypo are starting with the egg protein of albumin. BIO, a fermentation-derived honey company who recently announced that they would be developing fermentation-derived buffalo milk proteins. And Augmented Reality, while creating fermentation-derived functional proteins, beginning with the egg protein of albumin. Over the last 6 months, along with the continued trend of Israeli companies partnering with international conglomerates, we see the ecosystem's growth with more partnerships across the entire value chain. Companies are moving from a model of creating the entire product to specializing in specific parts of production process. Significant partnerships that we've seen over the last 6 months include Supermeat, who partnered with food and biotech company Ajinomoto for the development of alternative growth factors. FutureMeat and CPF, and the largest food companies in Asia, who will work together to develop hybrid cultivated meat products for the Asian market. Meatix subsidiary Piece of Meat signed a strategic agreement with microprotein company Enough to develop hybrid cultivated and fermentation-based products. Wonderfish, who in a unique agreement signed a licensing agreement with Tufts University, rights to the IP in fish cell cultivation, and used this as the basis to found their company. Innovapro and macadamia milk company Milkadamia, who partnered to develop chickpea-based ice cream. Simply Good partnered with International Flavors and Fragrances for the creation of spirulina-based smoked salmon. And Remilk, who signed a cooperation agreement with CBC and its subsidiary Terra Dairies for the production and marketing of fermented dairy products. Israeli companies continue to grow, with 5 companies opening or announcing the intention to open production facilities to increase capacity. In Israel, cultivated meat company Aleph Farms announced they would be opening an R&D and production facility in Rehovot. Algae company Breville also announced they'd be opening a commercial pilot factory in Israel. 3 companies announced they would be opening their facilities abroad. Fermentation-derived dairy company Remilk announced they would be opening a commercial facility in Denmark. Plant-based baby formula company Else will be opening a manufacturing facility in Oregon, and Meatex subsidiary Piece of Meat will open their pilot plant in Belgium. We will now move on to discuss government support for alternative proteins. The Israeli government continues to be a big supporter of alternative proteins. 2 significant events happened in this field in the first half of 2022. Firstly, the Israeli Innovation Authority approved the world's largest cultivated meat consortium, which received $18 million in funding and will include 14 companies and 10 academic labs, all working together to solve the biggest problems in cultivated meat. Secondly, Israel's permanent representative to the UN, Gilad Erdan, chose to celebrate the traditional Independence Day barbecue with alternative proteins. We were happy to participate in the event along with international ambassadors from around the world and leading companies in the Israeli ecosystem. In the realm of science and technology, we see many companies commercialized based on academic research, with 17 companies founded in this manner. Hebrew University is in the lead, with 9 companies commercialized based on research coming out of the university. In total, those startups have raised $431 million to date. 2 companies each were commercialized based on research coming out of the Technion and Tel Aviv University, with companies commercialized based on research coming out of the Technion having raised $121 million so far. Weizmann and Volcani each have 1 startup commercialized based on their research. There are many opportunities for alternative protein research funding, both in the academic and commercial sphere. First and biggest grant comes from the Israeli government corporation, GFI Israel, together sponsored by the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, and GFI, for a total of $1.2 million in funding and up to $85,000 per project. This grant is focused on all realms of alternative proteins, plant-based, fermentation-derived, and cultivated. The deadline was the 8th of August. Second grant is a cooperation between EIT and GFI Europe, which has 400,000 euros in total funding, and combined 100,000 euros grant per project. This is a grant for media recycling technologies or low-cost cell culture media, and the deadline is the 30th of September. Third grant is grant with SIRD, Agri-Food Tech Sector Track. This is sponsored by SIRD in cooperation between Enterprise Singapore and the Israeli Innovation Authority. This grant has up to $1.5 million per project. The deadline is the 22nd of September. The fourth and final grant is the grant, the US-Israel Binational Agricultural Research and Development Fund, sponsored by the Israeli government and its government. Its funding is up to $600,000 per project. This is a grant for development of alternative quality protein sources, including plants, fungi, and algae. And the deadline is the 13th of September. For more information on alternative proteins, please visit our website, where you can find both scientific and industry resources, including all of our State of Innovation reports, academic and research databases, and more.